All right. All right, we are live. Coming down in 3, 2, and 1. And welcome on into what is a very depressing post-game pod. Here it is, the Blue Horseshoe podcast. George Bremer, Ryan Hickey, George live from Cincinnati. Colts lose 34-14. George, it is very fitting here that for the Colts to lay really the biggest egg, have their worst overall game. Offense, defense, special teams all combined to having their worst game really since week number 6. Very fitting that you're sitting there with a black shirt on. It was basically a funeral, at least for these 60 minutes. It was ugly to watch.
An old-fashioned butt whipping right there, and I think it's a reminder of how quickly things change in this league. Last week you could say that was arguably the best game they had as far as all three phases playing together. It wasn't the best game they played from start to finish. It wasn't the best 60 minutes plus last week, but it was the best complementary football that they'd had. They got big contributions from all three phases. Today was the exact opposite. This was the worst complementary football they've had. Aside from the defense scoring a touchdown, nobody else helped out another unit or really did much of their own, took care of much of their own business on their end. You had one offensive touchdown. The defense couldn't defend a screen pass. And, special teams had a missed field goal, a missed extra point, and a really costly turnover at the one moment in the second half that it looked like they might have a chance to get back in the game. But I think the overriding theme is, self-inflicted wounds. Shane Steichen said it. A lot of the players kind of parroted that in the locker room after the game. Just look offense alone. I mean, you score a touchdown and you're called back for a holding penalty. The first three drives of the game, you had a sack, a negative run, and a penalty, a false start that, short circuit each of those drives. You come away with no points. And meanwhile, the Bengals were getting hot. So, yeah, I think it was just a missed opportunity. I think that's the biggest takeaway I have from it.
And it's frustrating, too, because I feel like the Colts beat themselves. Like, you watch this game, I don't think the Bengals did anything special where it's like they were just the better team. And sometimes that just happens. You run into a buzzsaw or, like you said, to start the pod, it was just an old-fashioned butt whooping, and that happens. Like, the Colts on, like, the scoreboard and the stats say they got their butt whooped. But, like, you watch the game, like, that's what's frustrating, George, is, like, they beat themselves more than I think the Bengals beat themselves. Like you just highlighted. Penalties, costly turnovers won by Gardner Minshew in the red zone, by Isaiah McKenzie, fumbling away really the last chance the Colts had to come back in this game down by 2 touchdowns with Jake Browning, we thought, in the locker with a serious injury. Turned out to be not that bad, and he came back in later on. But that costly penalties, 4 points Matt Gay left on the scoreboard there and missed kicks. And even, look, this is not the reason why they lost, but the referees are not very good in this game on the Colts side. Either there's an egregious missed block in the back on the first screen to Chase Brown for a touchdown that should have been called back. Kenny Moore just had no chance, and I thought it was, again, that's textbook block in the back. But either way, when you're a good team, you overcome that. I think in this game, George, what's frustrating is the Colts beat themselves, I think, more than the Bengals beat the Colts. What do you think about that?
I think it's a little bit of both. I think the Colts did not play well, and I think that's something that they've got to own up to, and they are. They're in the locker room saying that this is not an effort that you can give in a December game, with playoff implications dripping all over it. But I think at the same time, I think Cincinnati had really good game plan offensively. I mean, they took advantage of the Colts' speed and used it against them. I think they understood that DJ Speed wasn't here. They were daring the linebackers to make tackles in open space and the defensive backs to make tackles in open space, and it really slowed down that pass rush. I think that's what allowed them to hit some of the big shots that they were able to hit outside of the screens. They were able to get a couple passes downfield to T. Higgins and Jamar Chase. Not a ton. I don't think it was egregious, but I think their ability to set those plays up came from the fact that Brian Callahan, their offensive coordinator, had a really outstanding game plan today. I think he came in and he neutralized what the Colts do best. I mean, they had 21 sacks in this 4-game win streak, none today. And really, they were very seldom near the quarterback. They did a good job of getting the ball in their hands fast. But again, I think that screen game really changed the way this defense played. And I think you got to give the Bengals credit for that. Now, the Colts have to, we talk about it all the time. You set a fire in this league, you better put it out. DeForest Buckner said they opened Pandora's box, and he's absolutely right. I guarantee you on Saturday, you're going to see that play a few times from Pittsburgh and see if the Colts have got it corrected.
They have to. You're right. Especially with Mitch Trubisky being playing quarterback. And we saw how he played against the Patriots on Thursday night. You're 100% right about that. That's on film now. That has to be corrected ASAP because that just crushed him. Absolutely crushed him in part in this game here. And like I said, it started early and the Bengals kept going to it. And it was a key play there, offense, that opened up everything else for the team. This was, like you said before, to start the podcast, a complete egg laying by all three phases, right? We've seen different times of the defense against the Saints and the Browns just stunk, but the offense was there to make some other plays. This is the first game since the Jaguars game week 6 where offense, defense, and special teams, all three, bad. No real bright spots whatsoever. If I ask you, George, who are you more disappointed in out of the three units? Like, which one surprised you the most, or which one do you think really had their worst day? Who would you say the three? Offensively, were you more disappointed, defense, or special teams?
Yeah, I mean, it's really all three. The special teams was the biggest surprise because you just don't expect that from them. They haven't had those kind of flubs and errors on a regular basis. I think that was the most shocking thing, that they had a huge turnover, that really took away whatever remaining hope there was there in the fourth quarter. That was shocking. And the missed kicks from Matt Gay, you just don't see that, not outside of Germany. So, those were things that you couldn't predict coming. But I think the offense was probably the most disappointing from the sense that you knew the defense would have a challenge. You knew that Jake Browning had played well last week. We talked about it all week in the pod. You knew that the Bengals had an outstanding set of skill position players, and you knew it was possible that they were going to put some points on the board. That was not a shock. Defense didn't play well, and so they don't deserve any credit for how things went. But I'm not as disappointed with them because I think that was a more likely outcome than the offense really just not showing up. They had basically two really good drives. The one they scored the touchdown on was like a 17-play drive, and then the one that they also scored a touchdown on but wiped it out with their own holding penalties. Outside of that, I can't even really remember them moving the ball consistently or really putting any kind of pressure on, Cincinnati's defense in really any way, shape, or form.
To boil it down even like, because I think it is the offense. I mean, I'm more disappointed in the offense compared to the defense and special teams, but even like to go within the offense, the run game, George, we talked about it on the preview pod Thursday. This was the worst rushing defense in the league in terms of yards per game, yards per carry. And we really thought, even without John Teller there, hey, you run the ball with Zach Moss. Not only establish your own ground game with an offensive line that's really damn good, but also keep Jake Browning, and more importantly, that three-headed monster at receiver on the sidelines. Don't put your defense on the field for a long stretch of time and allow them to, allow that Bengals offense to get more opportunities to hit them with big plays. And that was going to start with the run game. And you look at this game, George, not only do they rarely run the ball, when they did not run it well whatsoever. Zach Moss, 13 carries, 28 yards as a team, just 18 carries, 46 yards, 2.6 yards per carry. Again, against the worst rushing defense in the league. And Shane Steichen came out firing. I think it was 8 of the first 9 or 9 of the first 10 plays when the game was still 0-0 and 7-0. Like, it was, the game script didn't flip there. You have to throw the ball. Early in that game, it was pass. I don't know if Shane Steichen knew something we did in terms of, hey, they're going to sell it for the run. Let's try to open it up. They had some success early on passing the ball, but early on, anytime Zach Moss wanted to run the ball, it was nothing. And outside of maybe like midway through the second quarter, he got a few like 8-10 yard runs. That run game, George, was shut down completely, and it had no chance.
And I think that's probably the biggest concerning thing outside of, the immediacy of the screen game and knowing that you're going to face that again next weekend. The next most concerning thing is the run game, because this is the fourth time in 5 weeks now that they have failed to rush for 100 yards. And today it was just non-existent. I mean, they didn't threaten the Bengals whatsoever with the run game today. And it's something that obviously they're going to need going forward. Even if you are able to rebound from this, and there's every reason to believe they can bounce back from this game and get into the playoffs. Odds are very strong now after losing today that you're going to go on the road. And you could be in conditions similar to today where it's a little bit chilly. You're almost certainly going to be outdoors. You're going to have to run the ball. You're going to have to find a way to consistently run the football. And they're not – it's a month now that you really have not seen them be able to do that. And I think that's, highly concerning. I think the offensive line, as we're talking about who had really, really bad days, I think the offensive line had one of its worst performances. Bremer Ryan had a lot of trouble over on the edge. And he's been great all year long, but he could not handle the Bengals pass rush today. And the penalties, the offensive line had more penalties called on them today than they probably had on the season coming in. I mean, I don't have that in front of me, but it feels like it. They were constantly being called for things because they were getting beat. I mean, it was grabbing and tripping and, just trying to make up for the fact that you weren't winning the battle up front. That's, it's hugely concerning. Because they need this offensive line to lead the way on offense. It's how you win with a backup quarterback. It's what the Bengals did. They were able to go out there and protect Jake Browning through both play calls and through the way the offensive line played. They didn't run the ball very well either, but they overcame that with the screen game. Colts had no answers offensively at all today. And, again, time's running short. You're going to have to figure that one out really fast.
Absolutely. And like you said, I mean, look, Trey Hendrickson is one of the best edge rushers in the league. So it's not like oh, okay, like you're going against Joe Blow and he was having a day. It is still one of the best players. But with that said, George, then you look ahead, TJ Watt coming to town on Saturday, like, holy cow, Shane Steichen, Tony Sparano Jr. better have some adjustments and preparations ready because, like I said, Bernard Rhyman especially. And two, the false starts, you're leaning back because you're trying to get off faster because you don't want, Hendrickson blowing by you. That defensive line for the Bengals was wreaking hell all game long. Like I said, in terms of penalties, also, too, in terms of pressure. Now, Minshew's only sacked 3 times, but also, too, it felt like right away, first play of the game was fitting. Now, looking back on it, sacked the first play of the game. They set the tone right away. And that Colts offensive line, who's had a resurgence, right, who's had a massive bounce back after last year, this was one of their worst, maybe the worst game, George. We got to, really go back and look at between penalties, between lack of pushing anyone off the ball. It's definitely one of, arguably, the worst game they played all season long.
Yeah, there's no question about it. I think it was one of the areas that struggled the most. And look, we talked about it all week. December games are won in the trenches. And last week in Tennessee, they won that game in the trenches. This week in Cincinnati, they lost the game in the trenches. And I guarantee you on Saturday against Pittsburgh, it's going to be the same thing. Whoever wins the trenches will walk out of there with a victory.
Absolutely. And that's got to get short up here. Let me ask you this. Do you have any problem with the disparity in terms of pass plays to run plays? Again, I know they were down 14 twice in this game. So that kind of gets that out of whack. But 39 pass attempts for Gardner Minshew, just 18 total runs. But again, we saw that disparity even in the first half when the game was still close. It was highly pass, little run. Do you have any problem with how the game was called from an offensive perspective where it was a very pass-heavy attack?
No, because they couldn't run the ball. I would if they were getting some seams, but they were running into a brick wall every time. And I just don't think that there was any sense in continuing that. I get, why people are going to look at that and have an issue with it. But my biggest issue with Steichen today was not taking the personal foul penalty and pushing them back to a 2nd and 18. He said, he explained it in the post game. He said that he felt like they were in a situation where if you take the penalty, you may end up in 3rd and 7 anyway, on the next play. So they just want to go ahead and take the down there. And it wasn't going to move them out of field goal range. So they felt like it was the same challenge. I would have gone the other way on that one. But I think as far as offense goes, I think they were just doing what they had to do. I mean, there was no – it's inexplicable why. I mean, this team's able to run over Tampa Bay, who was an outstanding run defense. And they come in here today and they make the Bengals look like Tampa Bay. I don't understand why, but the run game never – I didn't have any problem with not calling it because it wasn't like, oh, they're close. Look, that was just a move here or a missed tackle there is what they're missing. It was going nowhere.
I hate to agree because, again, we talked about, I was especially the one trying to push it, run the ball. But they gave you early on really no reason to believe, oh, hey, let's run the ball. And even when they got the game close and tied it up 14-14, it's okay, new game. Now you can kind of get back to going into the rhythm and flow of your offense. They still, again, were not pushing anyone off the ball. And the offensive line dictated Shane Steichen's play calling. And he could not believe that they were going to move guys consistently to get 4 or 5 yards a pop. It was frustrating. But like I said, the offensive line gave him no reason to have faith that they were going to be able to move the ball. and be aggressive. And it's frustrating. And also too, George, I mean, it's not – look, Gardner Minshew, the deep ball, it's hit or miss. And when it's a miss, he throws some ugly deep balls. And that's also frustrating too is – you are dealing with what you have, right? He's a backup for a reason. We're not trying to make him be anything more
No.
than that. And it's like the pass plays too were there. If like for the one to the pass in the end zone of Kylan Grant, if that ball is 5 yards further out, leads him instead of underneath, and it hits off, I think it was Logan Wilson was the defender, off his helmet out of bounds, that's a touchdown. And I believe, if I'm not mistaken here, that drive led to the Matt Gay missed field goal, I'm pretty sure.
I think so.
So like you just throw an NFL quarterback accurate ball there where there's no one in your face, where there's no safety over the top to worry about. You just drop it in the bucket like you do in practice. It's a touchdown. Some other deep passes as well, underthrown. Alec Pierce wasn't open, but a double move that the ball was just thrown out of bounds, crappling. It was one of those games where the passing game had opportunities. Michael Pittman Jr., another big game. But the tight ends were making plays over the middle. They just could never find that explosive play. And again, in a game where your offensive line's not moving anyone, when you don't get the 25, 30, 50-yard play and you need 10 plays to score a touchdown, in this game, it's not a recipe for success.
No, absolutely. That's what Cincinnati did so well today that the Colts didn't. They were able to not really run the ball, but they were still able to get big plays in the passing game and move those chains and put pressure on that Colts defense. And the Colts, I felt like Gardner regressed a little bit today from last week. Last week was one of his, if not his best game. It was certainly right up there in terms of looking for Alec Pierce, being aggressive, taking those deep shots. I thought today he really settled for the check down a lot, even in situations where he didn't have to. I know there were a couple of times watching from the press box where Pierce was open and Gardner just didn't go that way. And I don't know, maybe it was a little bit of everything, the deficit, the lack of a run game, the offensive line not having its best day. There were a lot of things at play there, and maybe that's what was causing it. But it did feel like another day where you were kind of hoping that last week, we talked about it all week long, you're hoping that last week was a big step forward and Minshew was going to be a little more aggressive and try to get Alec Pierce involved. I think you can tell how different this offense is when Pierce is used as a weapon and versus, when he's largely ignored.
And at least, I mean, now they're looking at him a little bit more consistently deep. But again, it's just like it's Minshew's ability and most of the time lack thereof to get it to him consistently. That is the difference here. And like you said, the thing I want to give credit to the Bengals with, because I think part of what led to their explosive passing game, which had 3 passing plays over 40 yards, was they didn't run the ball great, but they ran the ball well enough to keep the Colts honest. And that's what I thought, like, bare minimum, the Colts would have done, which also hurt their passing attack, too, in the second half, is the Bengals had no respect, nor should they, for the run game. So it was just sell it to stop the pass. The rushers were putting their ears back. And Trey Hendrickson basically has a target on, number 10's back all day because you have no fear of the run game, where for the entire game, it was 32 rushes for the Bengals, 111 yards, 3.5 yards per carry. Nothing great. But it's good enough, George, when you run the ball almost 4 yards a carry like Joe Mixon did himself, to keep the defense honest, to at least have it in the back of your brain, maybe we got to watch out for the run here. And that, again, when you're doing that and allowing these 3 receivers, plus now Mixon and Chase Brown in a screen game to also have to worry about, put this defense, kept them on their heels consistently, where they let up 34 points, where on the other side, the Colts, there was no fear of the run. They were single balanced. It was pass attack, and you played right. What we feared going into this game is exactly what happened. The Colts were one-dimensional offensively. It was only the pass. And on the other side, the Bengals, who were the worst rushing team in the league, with Grover Stewart also coming back, George, ran the ball well enough to at least keep the Colts honest.
And the Colts did. I mean, if you go back to the preview pod, they didn't hit any of the keys. We were talking about you got to run the ball well. They did not run the ball. You got to get after the opposing quarterback, get the sacks, because these receivers are going to make plays if you give them any kind of time. Didn't accomplish that, and the receivers made plays. And you got to win the turnover battle, and they didn't do that. So at the end of the day, the outcome is pretty predictable given the fact that they were not able to win in the most key areas that they had to win going in. So I think the biggest thing the Colts need to do now, and it's hard this time of year, is flush this. The season's not over. This wasn't the playoffs. You're not heading into the offseason now, getting ready for the draft and free agency. You got a game in 6 days.
Right.
And that might be the best part of this. In all honesty, this might be the best week to have a short week. Get rid of this. Get it out of your mind. Learn from it. Don't ignore it. Learn from what went wrong, and go out there in front of the home crowd on Saturday and put out a good performance. Because the saving grace for you right now is that it looks like 4 or 5 teams are going to be 7-6 when this day shakes out. We'll see Denver and Buffalo are playing now, but Houston lost. Obviously, Pittsburgh lost on Thursday. So Cleveland's the big winner out of all this right now. Of the 4 teams that were 7-5 coming in today, they're the one that's sitting at 8-5 right now, up on that 5 seed, probably feeling pretty good about their spot. The Bengals, obviously, with what they did the last 2 weeks, get themselves heavily back into this mix and now have a tiebreaker over the Colts, as do the Browns. So if you're the Colts right now, I think what happened today is the emphasis is obviously huge on the Steelers game. You can't afford to lose that one and still have realistic hopes of making the playoffs. But also put more on that Texans game at the end of the year. We've been talking about that for a while, how big that game could be. The way things shook out today, that game's looming even larger now at the end of the season. But to get there, you got to take care of business the next 3 weeks, and that means pretty much a complete turnaround from what we saw today.
It is mixed emotions when it comes to like the overall playoff seed, because in what, like, how I guess I feel more than anything is this was a huge missed opportunity, because like I said, the Steelers lose. If you win this game, you have a big tiebreaker over the Bengals. You had the Texans lose as well. Like you said, we could have, if the Broncos and Bills win, 5 teams at 7-6, and the Colts having tiebreakers or potential tiebreakers over most of those teams would have been massive. They would have had it over every single one except for, and in that case, it would have been every single one if they won today, because the Browns are 8-5 with their win, and that's the only tiebreaker right now the Colts wouldn't have had. But now losing to the Bengals, like I said, you lose that tiebreaker, so now there's another team above you or equal with you that is basically above you at this point, which is frustrating. You catch a break with the Texans losing inexplicably to the Jets, and CJ Stroud also getting hurt in that game. Hopefully he's okay with the concussion. That's also something now to monitor as well moving forward. But when the Steelers lose, when you could have knocked the Bengals back down, when you could have taken advantage of the Texans losing, you wouldn't have clinched it, George, but they could have really set themselves up really pretty here with a big time win. And for me, I feel more frustration at a missed opportunity than, let's say, relief of, they lost, but at least everyone else for the most part lost as well. It is good, but it feels like more of a missed opportunity than is, let's say, a relief.
I think missed opportunity is the operative phrase here. You had a chance, as you just said, not to take control of the playoff race, but to put yourself in a nice, comfortable position the way Cleveland did. Instead, you welcomed another team into the door. It was already a crowded field, and you just opened the door for Cincinnati, welcomed them into the party. And now you're still in a very similar situation to where you were 2 weeks ago, where it is a mosh pit for that 6 and 7 seed right now in the AFC. And, you've got the tiebreakers over some teams. You're losing them to others. I know this much: they cannot afford a loss to Pittsburgh on Sunday. That's pretty obvious, but that has become more or less. We talk about this one being, kind of a playoff game in a playoff atmosphere, and it was. And the Colts did not respond well. And now you're going to have another one on Saturday. The Pittsburgh's going to come to town off of 2 terrible losses. I'm sure they want to get that taste out of their mouth as quickly as possible. They also have extra time to prepare. And they just saw a blueprint of what to do, to cause problems for this football team. It's going to be a huge game on Saturday, and I think the Colts have to respond accordingly. It's going to be a huge day in downtown Indianapolis. Purdue is playing Arizona, the number 1 team in the country, over at Gamebridge Fieldhouse. That tip-off is the same time as kickoff of the Colts game. So it's going to be a really crazy, insane Saturday afternoon down in downtown Indy. And the Colts have got to take that energy and put it to work. If you lose on Saturday to Pittsburgh, you won't be out, but you're going to start needing help. You know what I mean? They still have a lot of things in their own hands right now because you play Pittsburgh and Houston. If you win out, you're probably in good shape. I mean, first of all, you'd be 11-6, which would probably be good enough too.
Yes.
But you would have the tiebreakers over Pittsburgh and Houston. So I think you still, like you said, I think it's a major missed opportunity because if you win today, well, you'd be tied for the division lead, and that would be a much bigger factor in all of this as well. Plus, you'd have a game in hand on everybody else aside from Cleveland in this race. Now, you kind of back into that. It's unlikely that you're going to win the AFC South. And, you're like I said, it's a mosh pit. I don't know how else to explain it. It's a mosh pit right now in the AFC for the 6 and 7 seed.
And the biggest fear is losing out on a tiebreaker, even if you win, 10 games and you're out of the playoffs. And like that's where like this game was so important, George. We talked about it with tiebreakers. Like the last thing you want is just to need like your season. Like if they lose on Saturday, the season on the life support. But a win today would have really just catapulted them because bare minimum, you at least control your destiny and you yourself determine whether you're in the playoffs or not. And if the Colts go 3-1 these last 4 games, it'd be 10 and 7, probably still in. But again, too, like now you are with a key loss of the Bengals. They have they are in over you if your record's the same. The Browns, obviously, they're in over you if the records are the same. And so, depending on if they lose one more game, who that's to, you could easily be 10 and 7 or 9 and 8, and 9 and 8 get you in the playoffs. But you're on the wrong side of a tiebreaker or two, and now you're ricocheted out of the playoffs. Like that's the biggest fear is being knocked out without you controlling your own destiny, if you will. And that's why this game was just so, we talked about it mean triple. Honestly, and now for Cincinnati, it does. Now you pull even with the Colts. Now they're in the playoff spot. Now they're the ones with at least a game in hand over the Colts. So now all of a sudden they're sitting pretty going forward. They got more confidence. And now the Colts are the ones reeling, coming in, like you said, going now on a short week at home with the Steelers coming to town who are coming off of a longer weekend when they played on Thursday night. You said it before, and I want to circle on it because I never got to react. I think you're 100% right. I do think a short week is good for this team because you can't dwell on the loss. You can't, this was just one where everything went wrong. And sometimes you flush it, you move on. And that's the best thing you can do is just not have it linger in the back of your head and start getting doubts, being forced to move on quickly, not have it just sit there and stew. I think could be a benefit for this team, George. I'm curious, did Shane Steichen after the game, because some coaches they'll give you a good quote like this or not. I wasn't sure if Shane went this way. Are they going to bury the game tape? Did he say we're going to go out there in the practice field and bury the tape? No.
It was pretty typical Shane Steichen, but he did say, that this was somebody asked him, was this the worst game of the season? And he said, complimentary football wise, yeah, it probably was. And they've got to clean a lot of stuff up. And I think it's good that there's no, I said this last year, you can go back, and find our first pod that we did last year in the regular season at our old home. So probably out there somewhere.
After the tie.
I said it after the tie, that it felt like a loss and that I was concerned that the team didn't seem to be concerned enough. That when you got down there, there was a lot of people talking, there was a comeback, and it didn't seem to bother them enough in that moment. That wasn't a problem today. I can tell you this team is very understanding of what happened. And I think that's where it starts. You have to look in the mirror and say, you know what? We caused this. And I don't think every team does it. It's easy after a time like this to say, oh, well, there was a bad call here, or, it was mistakes. And that's the fine line. When you start talking about self-inflicted wounds, which they were talking about a lot, that's what happened out there. But it's how you kind of internalize that. If you just say, oh, we beat ourselves, and you just let it go, then it can haunt you again next week and the week after. But if you understand what you did to beat yourself, and I feel like that's more the feeling I'm getting from that locker room right now. It doesn't. I think the other big thing today that we really haven't talked about yet is Cincinnati has a lot of playoff experience on that roster. A lot of these guys have played in AFC Championship games, in the Super Bowl, have played in late season games that really matter to get you into playoffs. Even though you don't have Joe Burrow out there, you've got a lot of guys on the field who have been there, who have that confidence, who understand what it takes to win games like this. Pittsburgh does too. They went to the playoffs last year. They went through this exact scenario last year, trying to win, pretty much every game down the stretch and get in. So, yeah, they're struggling, but they have that advantage. This Colts team has not been in the playoffs since 2020. The players that have been in the playoffs, for the most part, have not been with this group. Even the guys that were here in 2020 that are still here haven't necessarily done it with the guys around them. You've got a lot of new faces since then, a lot of young guys out there. I think the Colts are still learning how to win in these situations. And I think Pittsburgh's another massive test in that regard. And you've got 6 days to get it right.
That's a really good point because when it comes to like the sense of urgency, right? It was there for the Bengals today because especially now they got, life breathed into them after that Jacksonville win, but they're fighting for their playoff lives at home. And like you said, that crowd and their intensity, the Bengals team that is, like you felt like they treated this like a playoff game. We talked about the Colts treating this game like a playoff game. It didn't feel like it. And I go back on the top of my head, George, the only other team I think the Colts faced that had their own sense of urgency, I think it was the Saints back in, was that week number 9? Because we talked about their offense not really getting it together, and they kind of felt like it was getting late soon if they weren't able to figure it out. And we saw them explode for 30 points and a big win. Otherwise, it's like we just saw the Buccaneers win today. The Buccaneers are now in first place in the NFC South. They weren't playing for their playoff lives when they came to Lucas Oil Stadium 2 weeks ago. Like this was the first team the Colts truly, really were playing against since the Saints game that were playing with a sense of urgency and played like this is a playoff game. I think it's a great point. I hope this is more of an eye-opener and a learning experience rather than one that gets in your head and sticks in your head moving forward. This is a very young team, right? We're talking about a lot of these guys, even guys that are there in 2020 for one that pops around like Zaire Franklin. He's not in his role now like he was back then. So even like guys that were in, on that team, forget about, like you said, and you're 100% right, there's new guys around you that makes it different, but also even the responsibilities of some of those guys that are on the team back then are now different and bigger than they were in 2020. So this was a first for a lot of guys on this team in terms of experiencing what it's like to be in a true playoff atmosphere. And I hope that, like you said, they take that and make it a positive, because you can go really, this is one of those games, George, we can go one of two ways. I think we'll see it on Saturday where this team is going to go. They can either get punched in the face, get up and be better for it, like it wakes them up, or like you said, you get punched in the face, all of a sudden now you get rattled, now you lose confidence, you're hesitant, and all of a sudden now a reeling Steelers team comes into Lucas Oil Stadium on Saturday and beats you. This game on Saturday, coming off of today, George, now when you start to put the Steelers game in perspective, it does feel like this is going to determine where the season goes. Like if they lose this game, they're not, like the season's not over. They're going to be 7-7. You can still make the playoffs. But it feels like if you lose that game, it's all but over. And if you win that game, you bounce back off the mat. Like that shows you some gumption that this team does have. They've been doing it all year long, so there's no reason to doubt that they won't do it. But this basically getting punched in the face like they did today, George, definitely feels like now next week is one of those you draw the line in the sand. What's it going to be kind of games?
Yeah. I think it's just a situation where we know that there are a lot of flawed teams in this AFC race. Everybody, we talked about this weeks ago. Everybody left has something that they're trying to overcome. Either it's a backup quarterback, or their defense doesn't defend something very well, or the special teams are committing mistakes. Every one of them has a pretty significant flaw that they have to overcome. And the Colts, I think, are the team probably of all of them in this race, maybe Denver, with the least playoff experience on the roster. I mean, these guys, as you said, the guys that have been there haven't necessarily been there in the role that they're in, and not many of them have been to a playoff game. I mean, a lot of these guys are first and second year guys that are out there playing right now. Bernard Ryman's never played in the playoffs. Alec Pierce has never played in the playoffs. Josh Downs, he's only played in 13 regular season games. He hasn't played in the playoffs. So I think it's just one of the things you always hear time, like act like you've been there before. But what if you haven't? And I think that's the big key for the Colts right now. I think if you learn the right lessons today, this was a playoff-like atmosphere. It was a team that has been there. It's a team, like you said, it had a lot of urgency. Can you learn the right lessons from this so that you're ready for, I imagine, look, I know well enough, you know well enough, the Steelers are probably going to have 50% of the crowd there on Saturday. They travel like no other. Even though the game time was moved, there will still somehow be 30,000 Steelers fans in that stadium on Saturday, and they're going to be screaming for their team. It's going to be a neutral field kind of a feeling. You have got to match the energy. I thought the Colts did a good job of it in Tennessee last week. Tennessee was a desperate team, but they weren't a team in the playoff race. They were a team just trying to stay alive. Now you're going to have Pittsburgh with even probably more desperation than Cincinnati had, because if you're Pittsburgh, you're looking up in your division. Baltimore just won in walk-off fashion today. The Bengals look red hot after the last 2 weeks with Jake Browning. And Cleveland is sitting there at 8-5 in control of the wild card race. Pittsburgh's coming off 2 losses to 2 teams that I guarantee you they did not expect to lose to. They're going to be as desperate as any team the Colts have faced all year, and the Colts have got to match it. They've got to learn the right lessons from what happened out there today, and they've got to match the energy that they're undoubtedly going to see from the Steelers and the Steelers fan base on Saturday.
Speaking of energy, George, I'm going to ask you this: since you were in the locker room and got to talk to not only second but also the players as well. I looking at the game from at least my view on the TV, it felt like there was that juice wasn't there in part because I'm not giving them a break, but I think it's just human nature that there was an emotional letdown today. Even though again, the Bengals treated like a playoff game. If you're the coach, you look back recently, the last few games they played, where you get 2 pick sixes from Kenny Moore, a close game against the Panthers, but you need your defense to bail you out. You need a last-second interception against the Patriots to seal that win, but that comes down to the last 2 minutes. Strip sack of Baker Mayfield to win that game within the last 2 minutes. And then last week, you needed an insane overtime drive to win the game in Tennessee. Really, the last 3 games the Colts have played all come down to the last 2 minutes. All the Colts, and to their credit, each time they did, they made a play to win the game. But it feels like when you win, when you're constantly skating by and needing, to make a play the last second to win the game, it feels like with all that emotional high, you're eventually due for a letdown. Did you get a sense, George, whether it was even pregame or at least postgame, that there was that emotional letdown from this team a little bit in this game?
Steichen was asked about it directly. Did he sense anything? He wasn't asked about a letdown, but he was asked about, did you sense a poor performance coming at all? And he said practice was great this week and warm-ups were great this week, and he thought everything was in line. But it did, I think on the field, it did look like, as you said, human nature, that there was a little bit of a letdown today. I mean, they've been going hard even before this 4-game stretch. Some of those losses they had during the 3-game losing streak that preceded this were really emotionally draining losses. Everything that happened at the end of the Browns game, giving up the big plays against the Saints, and then you go in and you claw back into it. It felt like, to me, a little bit like that team that you're watching in a basketball game and they're 30 points down and they come all the way back and they get it to 8 and they can't finish because they have no gas left. That's what it felt like out there today. And then it's human nature. The question now is, can you refill that tank? Can you get ready in 6 days? Because, again, I can't imagine Pittsburgh's going to be anything but extremely desperate. Coming off those losses to the Cardinals and the Patriots, who right now are picking second and third in the draft, and knowing what you're facing, not just in the wild card race, but in your own division. Pittsburgh's going to be in absolute must-win mode, and the Colts have to match that. And I think the Colts should be of the same mindset because they're not in a terribly different position. How they got there is different, but sitting here at 7-6 now and tied with the Texans and a game behind the Jaguars, and then this mix of, we'll see how many there are by the end of the day, but somewhere between 4 and 6 teams with the same record of you in the wild card race, it's a must-win game. I don't know if there's any other way to phrase that. It is a must-win game.
Completely agree. And obviously all week, if you're just tuning in for the first time, this is the Blue Horseshoe podcast. He's George Bremer. I'm Ryan Hickey. Appreciate you tuning on in. Make sure to subscribe to the YouTube channel, also wherever you do get your podcasts. We're going to be all over that Steelers game this week. One thing to kind of wrap up here, George, is this, because some final thoughts here. Obviously, look, you don't want to ever lose a game, especially, again, with how costly and how important this game was. You wanted to win. But if you said before the game, Ryan, the Colts are going to lose no matter what, I would have at least taken an ass beating. But I do think getting punched in the face once in a while, George,
fair.
I think it is a good thing. It can help your team. And I'm hoping that this sort of ass beating, where we look at the offense just getting pushed around, the defense getting pushed around, the special teams making numerous mistakes, it is one of those things where it does kind of jar you a little bit and wake you up and realize, hey, maybe you're not as good as you thought you were the last month, and it helps to reset focus.
I think that's completely fair. I mean, I don't know. I'm not going to sit here and say guys we're reading their press clips, but we've just been talking about a lot of young guys on this team, a lot of guys who haven't been through this before. And just like it's human nature to kind of run out of gas after some of these, really incredibly emotional games that they played, it's human nature to start feeling yourself a little bit after 4 straight wins. And you start thinking you're invincible, right. Especially when you're 21 and 22 years old, 23 years old, like a lot of these guys are. So I think in some ways this can help you. But again, I think it goes back to you have to take the right lessons from it.
Yes.
If you just flush this game in the sense of it didn't happen, burn it, and you don't learn anything about why it happened, then you could repeat it again on Saturday against the Steelers. But if you flush it, you put it away, you bury it somewhere deep down and never speak of it again, you might have what you need to come out of here with a win. And I think that's it's going to be interesting to see. He's a young team. Shane Steichen's done a great job throughout the season of getting them ready and responding. Not many teams in this situation with a backup quarterback as young as they are going to bounce back from a 3-game losing streak with a 4-game winning streak, but they have been streaky, and they can't afford to go the other way this time. You've got to end this as a one-off loss and get started back on the winning ways if you want to play deep into January, even the second week of January. You're going to have to find a way to win on Saturday.
You're right. And the Steelers, too, coming on in, right, reeling off of 2 losses that are inexplicable and inexcusable. But for the lack of talent, especially offensively, they have, Mike Tomlin, the one thing he has been great at is, but if you overlook the Steelers, if you are not fundamentally sound, they will exploit that. They'll make you look silly, and they'll beat you. It could be ugly, but they'll beat you. And that's why, too, George, you look at how the Colts got beat today. You hope, like I said, if you take lessons from this and you take this loss the right way, if you take it the right way and learn from it, you could shore a lot of these flaws up and make sure a repeat does not happen on Saturday. If not, George, we've seen it to plenty of NFL teams, and we've seen it with this Colts team this season happen earlier the year. 1 loss compounds to 2 or 3, and all of a sudden now you're in a spiral and free falling, and season's over. We saw that. I think the Browns bled into that Saints game. If you cut the bleeding today, or maybe tomorrow, if you want to really kind of do one last postmortem tomorrow, fine.
Right.
And move forward, you are in a better spot. If not, like you said, we're going to be talking about a team after Saturday that's going to be a loser again to the Steelers and have their playoff lives on life support.
There's no doubt about it. There's no doubt about it. It is a must-win situation. You've got to take the right lessons from this game. You've got to fix the self-inflicted wounds that were caused. And like you said, you've got to be extremely fundamentally sound, and you're going to go against a Mike Tomlin unit. You got to be ready to go. You got to come out there. Look, they may get some of the guys back. I don't know how long Braden Smith's out. I'm not sure how serious his injury is. I don't know how long EJ Speed's out. Obviously, you saw Juju Brent's practice this week. He's getting closer. We'll see who's able to go on Saturday. Maybe even an outside, very tiny chance of Jonathan Taylor. We'll see how that goes. I mean, the original was maybe 2 to 3 weeks. We were hearing more 3 to 5, but there's been no official timeline. So we'll see how all that shakes out. I wouldn't expect to see Taylor on Saturday, but the 4 starters that were out today are not ruled out, out of hand. It's not an Anthony Richardson situation with any of them. So who was here, by the way, and was signing autographs. And I guess if there's anything that happened from an Indianapolis standpoint today that was good, he's going to be joined by another big star soon. The Fever won the WNBA lottery, so I'm sure they will soon be welcoming Caitlin Clark to Indianapolis to join Anthony Richardson and Aaliyah Boston and Tyrese Halliburton. Look, the future is bright in Indianapolis. It's bright for this Colts team, but the present right now is got to be about correcting mistakes and making sure that they're not repeated next week.
Did Richardson have a sling?
He did not, that I saw. I can't guarantee that he didn't, but I never saw him with one. He didn't have it on when he was signing autographs on the field. He didn't have it on in the locker room after the game. I can't 100% say he didn't have one with him, but I personally never saw him in the sling.
Small step, George. Small step to hopefully what has been a good, speedy recovery and on the road for 2024. So that's what we'll take out of. That's the positive, George. We'll take out of an otherwise forgettable day in Cincinnati. AR is out of the sling and hopefully doing well in his rehab. So George is in all black, attended the funeral today. What was just one of the biggest no-shows of the season, 34-14 blowout loss to the Bengals. And now this week, George, like you said, it's going to be, we're going to bury the tape. We're going to move on from back here Tuesday, getting ready for Steelers Colts on Saturday. But like I said, now that game really ratchets up here to what is essentially a must-win game in the middle of December. It's going to be very, very intense. It's going to be a good one. It is absolutely going to be a good one. So
I think it's going to be a Pier 6 brawl, don't you? Don't you think this is going to be a Pier 6 brawl on Saturday?
I like that. I think you're right. Because, the trenches, that's where they got owned the most. Offensive line and defensive line. Man up this week, George. Like I said, you got to really, if nothing else, stand up for your own manhood at this point.
This one's a cage match. This one is last man standing. It's going to be, I think it's going to be extraordinarily physical. And again, I think both teams understand. you're pretty much playing for your playoff life.
You are. Oh, you are. The Colts had a taste of what a playoff game is like on the road. They should get a taste of what a playoff game is like now at home for the first time. Oh boy, since 2014, right? It's been a long time. It's been a very, very, very long time, George. Get the crowd juice. Let's go.
It's been a minute.
It has. Closest thing I guess we got was Christmas Eve against the Pats 2 years ago.
That was a big atmosphere, and that's big thing here too. I think the fans have got to bring it next Saturday as well. I mean, this is one of those times where I think this young team needs that energy, and they need to rebound on a really short week, get things back on track, and see if they can get those positive vibes flowing again around this football team.
You really saw that Bengals defense, especially feed off that crowd. Like you said, you're going to need fans this week. Got to bring the juice, got to bring the energy to have that defense and offense too. Feed off them Saturday, Lucas Oil Stadium. So that's going to do it for what has been just a somber, to say the least, post-game pod right here. We are going to be back on Tuesday. Subscribe. Finishing the only way we can, George. It's been ugly all around. Finishing strong here. Subscribe wherever you do get your podcasts, Blue Horseshoe Podcast. If you're watching right now on YouTube, you're right there. You 95% of the job is done. Hit the subscribe button so you can watch us as well. We'll be back on Tuesday.
Like and comment, right? Also, like and comment while you're down there. Drop a comment underneath the video. And you know what? We'll all try to put this one away. I'll try to forget it on the 2-hour ride home and get ready to roll again, because it's Steeler week. And I feel like it's the biggest week for this franchise since 2021.
It is. You're good. Good call with the comments. Comment below, because me and George have been venting that for the last 45 minutes. We got our frustrations out. Get yours out as well in the comments. We'll respond to those as well throughout the week. But like you said, now you wake up Monday morning, the focus is on black and yellow. So have a great rest of your week. We'll talk to you Tuesday right here on the Blue Horseshoe Pod.